You are watching programming from the East-West Center in Washington, D.C.
Good afternoon, everyone. I know it's earlier in the day out on the West Coast and certainly even earlier in Hawaii, but my name is Satu Lemay and I'm the Vice President of the East-West Center and delighted to welcome you to this very, very interesting program with our colleagues at the General Accounting Office and their new report that came out last month on migration to the United States under the Compacts of Free Association. As many of you know, the East-West Center has had a long-standing engagement and activity in the Pacific Islands region. We've worked extensively through it over the decades, and we are this year celebrating our 60th anniversary. So it's a particular delight to have colleagues from GAO focusing on this new study that impacts not only the Pacific, but what I found particularly intriguing and important about the study is how our relations with the freely associated states affects domestic continental United States, in this case, through the prism of migration. And many of you will be familiar with our Asia Matters for America initiative, which seeks to understand how our larger foreign policy geostrategic relations have subnational and local impacts, whether they be trade or the number of foreign students or engagement in numerous ways, cultural, educational, economic, and commercial. And so this is a kind of a case study of that, focusing on the compacts. And we have with us a really distinguished and knowledgeable group representing GAO on the study. We have Dr. David Gutnick, who's Director of International Affairs and Trade at GAO. And his portfolio includes the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, American Samoa, and of course the freely associated states. He has an MD from the University of Rochester and a bachelor's degree from Harvard. And so we're delighted, Mr. Gutnick, that you could join us. And two other colleagues who worked on the report, Mr. Emil Freiberg. Freiberg is the Assistant Director and Senior Economist there at GAO in the International Affairs and Trade team. And he's had long-standing experience in work and has done several reports looking at the compacts of free association. And also we first met, we were discussing before the program when he was working on some Southeast Asia related trade and investment matters. So delighted to have you back, Emil. Thank you so much. And finally, Ms. Caitlin Mitchell, Senior Analyst at the International Affairs and Trade team. And she has worked on a number of issues, whether they be financial contributions to UN or ISIS messaging. And she used to be at the Department of Defense as well. So Ms. Mitchell, thank you so much indeed for joining this presentation. So the format, as you all know, we're live streaming on YouTube. This is a on the record public program. And we will have a Q&A session approximately 20 minutes with 20 minutes remaining in the program. So for the first 30 or 40 minutes, we'll have our GAO colleagues give us a rundown of their work, and they have a slide program as well that they'll share some of the visuals and infographics from the actual report itself. So welcome to you all, and let me invite Mr. Gutnick, and followed by Ms. Mitchell and then Mr. Freiberg. Please, Dr. Gutnick.
Thank you, Satu. Thank you for that nice introduction, and thank you for inviting us to present at this webinar. And thanks to you all for coming to this event. We had a chance to look at the attendee list. In the hour before we came on, and it's nice to see a lot of familiar faces and familiar names. And we certainly recognize that there's a wealth of knowledge and lived experience in this audience. And so we'll try to live up to that in this presentation. We think we have some good information to present. We're going to shoot for about 30 minutes and look forward to a good Q&A after that. So let me just take a quick second about GAO. We're an arm of the U.S. Congress, established in 1921. The Budget and Accounting Act, the same bill that established OMB and the modern U.S. budget process. We were established in large measure to enhance the oversight functions of Congress. And so amongst other things, we evaluate executive branch programs and operations and report out to Congress. We also see ourselves as, we also do have a role in reaching a broader audience. So for purposes of today, you're our broader audience, and we very much appreciate the chance to present to you. Our work is often directed in legislation, and for example, in the amended compacts, we were written in, and we had plenty of work looking at oversight, doing oversight of the sector grants, the trust fund, and some of the other accountability provisions that are in the compact. But the work we're presenting on today was requested by, most of our work is actually at the request of chairs and ranking members of committees of jurisdiction. And this report was requested by Chair Murkowski, Chair of Senate Energy. I think many of you know that Senate Energy, as well as House Natural Resources, has had a deep interest in the freely associated states going back a long way. We issued the report we're presenting on just a number of weeks ago, and so this is a great chance for us to speak to it. Let me just pivot a little bit, and with apologies to those of you who are very familiar with the migration provisions, I want to just say a few things about the migration provisions before turning it over to Emil and Caitlin to present on a report. As I think you know, the key provisions of the compact were establishing self-governance, defense and security, and economic assistance. In the self-governance title, the migration provision resides, and it establishes specific rights to migration, and I'll just more or less paraphrase it. With few exceptions, citizens of freely associated states may enter the U.S. visa-free and may lawfully reside and work indefinitely in the United States and its territories. A couple other things worthy of mention. First, the migration rights under the compact do not expire. Unlike many of the economic provisions, economic assistance provisions, the migration rights do not expire in 2023 or 2024 in the case of Palau. They exist as long as the compacts are enforced, which is in perpetuity unless terminated by mutual agreement of both parties. So we found that this was a source of some confusion as we went around and did our work, and so it's worth pointing out. In addition, the U.S. Implementing legislation for the compacts in Micronesia and the Marshall Islands, at least, stated that with respect to the migration provisions, it was not Congress's intent to cause any adverse consequences in the U.S. and its territories. And so at that time, the legislation identified Guam, Hawaii, and the Mariana Islands and American Samoa as affected jurisdiction, and authorized but did not appropriate funds for U.S. areas that might see increased demand for social services, educational services, and the like. In the amended compact in 2003, the legislation authorized and provided and appropriated $30 million annually through 2023 to the affected jurisdictions. The amended compacts also require enumerations of compact migrants in the affected jurisdictions to take place every 5 years, in order in part to apportion the $30 million grants in proportion to the population of the 3 affected jurisdictions. The last enumeration would have been 2018, so we capture the last enumeration. Lastly, the amended compacts adopted a very specific definition of a compact migrant, in particular for purposes of the enumeration. So that is the citizens of the freely associated states who entered after 1986, and their US-born children under the age of 18. So the US-born children, of course, are US citizens, but they're also compact migrants until they reach 18 under the implementing legislation. Before I just pass this to my colleagues, we go to the next slide, I think, Caitlin. Just to mention that we've reported out 3 times on compact migration. The first was in the run-up to the amended compacts during the discussions, negotiations. the second in 2011, and here in 2020. In all three situations, we established a partnership, or we relied on the U.S. Census Bureau's data. Different forms of that data in different time periods, but in 2011 and 2020 in particular, we relied on the American Community Survey and also the special enumerations for Guam and the Mariana Islands, as the American Community Survey does not cover the territories. And just one quick thing to say about that, in 2011, as well as in the current report, we've received some feedback on the findings, which we'll be discussing in a moment, that the numbers we present, the numbers of migrants that are captured by the American Community Survey and the other tabulations are lower than other estimates that have been put forward of the number of compact migrants in the U.S. and the territories. We're very aware of that. We've received questions and commentary on that, and I think it'll be a good topic for discussion. So today we will talk about the census data and some of the other data that we have on the demographics of compact migrants and compact migration. We'll look again, as we did in 2011, at the costs to the affected jurisdictions as reported by the Mariana Islands, Guam, and Hawaii. And in this report, we made an effort to gather information from various public and private sector stakeholders on views and challenges associated with migration, and we've attempted to represent those to the best of our ability in this report. The team visited Arkansas, Oregon, Washington State, Hawaii, Guam, and Hawaii and Guam for this report. And I really wish to commend the team. I can say that they conducted over 500 interviews for this report, and I think it's reflected in particular in the views of stakeholders that we provide in this report. But let me turn it over then to Caitlin to jump into our findings.
Great, thank you, David. So first we'll talk a little bit about population and some of the demographic information that we learned about compact migration in the conduct of this engagement. So while the enumerations that David mentioned provide data on compact migrants in those select US areas, the affected jurisdictions, we at GAO have also reported on compact migrant populations in the 50 states using 5-year data from the American Community Survey. So GAO last reported on the compact migrant population in 2011 when there were an estimated 56,000 compact migrants in the US areas. In this new report, as you can see the map pulled from the report here, we found that the population of compact migrants rose an estimated 68% over the intervening years to about 94,000. So again, as David mentioned, that would include those who migrated to the US under the terms of the compacts, regardless of age, and their US-born children under age 18. Historically, most of the compact migrant population has lived in the affected jurisdictions, particularly Hawaii, Guam, and the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands. But we found in the data for this report that about half of all compact migrants, an estimated 50%, now live on the US mainland. This bar chart shows the US areas with an estimated 1,000 or more compact migrants. As part of our review, as David mentioned, we visited the 6 areas that happen to have the largest per capita share of compact migrants relative to their total population. So in this chart, that's the first 5 bars plus Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands right in the middle. For the first time, as David mentioned, we were also able to use additional American Community Survey data to tabulate demographic information for this population beyond US area of residence. For example, we looked at how many compact migrants were born in each FAS specific to each US state. We also obtained an estimate of how many are serving in the US military. If you're interested in knowing more about those demographic figures, including things like age, educational attainment, employment status, you can find more of that in our report, particularly Appendix 2 and Appendix 4. Also, as David mentioned, some stakeholders we interviewed did express concerns that the number of compact migrants that we reflect in this report is an undercount. Again, we just reiterate the American Community Survey is a survey, so they are estimated numbers. And we are aware of concerns that are perhaps not specific to this population, but specific to American Community Survey, such as non-response rates, language barriers, things that are challenges to both the survey and the decennial census data's collection. Finally, through interviews with compact migrant communities in the areas we visited, we learned some of the most common reasons for migration from the FAS to the United States include seeking out greater education or economic opportunities, as well as access to healthcare. Some people also talked about moving to join family members that are already living here or for greater personal freedom. So that is a quick recap of our population data in our report. I'll turn it over now to Emil to talk more about compact impact on US areas.
Okay, thank you, Caitlin. As David noted in his introduction to our talk today, Congress had identified affected jurisdictions in the Pacific, and we're really going to focus on Hawaii, the Mariana Islands, and Guam. And there was a process where Congress created a mechanism for those areas to report on compact impact cost to the governments. And in 2003, there were some appropriations, both an authorization and appropriation for a 20-year interval for $30 million a year. In addition, there's been a few other appropriations in intervening years periodically that Congress has provided. So I really want to talk about three things. I want to talk about some of the counts for the three Pacific areas, the impact costs that they have been reporting, and just what the federal compact funding has been that's been provided to those areas. So this is a slide that goes back into the 90s, so really into the first compact period, and then begin 2003 is sort of the crux of the second amended compacts interval, the 20-year interval. And so these are U.S. Census estimates that were prepared under contract to the Department of Interior. And you can see several different things here. I think there's obviously, growing compact populations in Hawaii and Guam sort of over the long interval. And so, for example, in Hawaii, it's really pretty steady growth. Hawaii surpassed Guam in terms of the level sometime between 2008 and 2013. And there's about 24,000 migrants using this definition in Hawaii as of 2018. If you look at the Guam data, you sort of see growth up into the 2008 period, and then some stability over a decade, sort of a decade period. The census tabulates about 19,000 compact migrants in Guam in 2018. The CNMI actually has a trend which sort of rose to the 2003 interval and then has since fallen. And so in 2018, it's about 2,500. And really this population decline tracks the decline in the CNMI garment industry. And so some of the other workers in the CNMI from foreign sources have also fallen. So I do want to point out a couple of things about our Hawaii data. The data we're presenting in this graphic and in our report for 2013 and 2018 differs from data which you may have seen previously and that is currently posted on the Department of Interior's website. And the reason for this is that during the course of our job, we sought a lot of additional information from Census on compact migration. And while they were researching and preparing data for us, Census discovered a programming error that had undercounted compact migrants in Hawaii in both 2013 and 2018. And so this slide is the revised data. And so, for example, in 2013, previously Census had undercounted Hawaii compact migrants by 6,000. And in 2018, the undercount was by 7,000. So we have corrected data, which I think is an important thing to add to this. I want to now turn to talk about the cost that has been reported by the three areas. And so basically what we have is the Hawaii and Guam's reported costs have risen since 2004, while the CNMI's reported cost has really varied over time. if you look at these three jurisdictions and for the period 2004 to 2018, the total cost reported is about $3.2 billion for the whole period. Hawaii reported $1.8 billion in compact impact cost. It's almost $200 million in 2018. Guam reported $1.2 billion in compact impact cost, and it's about $150 million in the last year, which is 2017. I'll just point out in this graphic, Guam did not provide an impact cost estimate for 2018. And if you look at the CNMI, obviously much lower. The total cost reported is about $116 million, $10 million in the last year. When we look at the composition or the source of these costs, for Guam and Hawaii, the largest impact cost is for education. And this is really directly a function of the number of compact migrant school children, both US citizens and people who are actually migrants who are also attending schools. In the CNMI, the largest cost category was public safety. I just want to provide a couple of comments then about the compact impact grant funding that has been provided by the federal government to these three jurisdictions. Between 2004 and 2019, the three jurisdictions combined receipts from the federal government was $509 million. This mostly is driven by the $30 million per year, which was appropriated and authorized in the 2003 amended compact implementing legislation. There's been some additional funds provided as well. As I mentioned a second ago, our population data is revised. And so one thing that has happened since then, once that data error was identified, Census notified Interior, and Interior has previously used that incorrect population data to divide the 30 million between Guam, CNMI, and Hawaii. And so with that error, the allocations previously provided were wrong for fiscal years 2015 through 2020. So currently Interior has proposed to correct this past allocation error by adjusting some future grants. So we have a section in our report where we sort of lay out sort of the status of this as of the time that we reported last month. So one of the things we did as we conducted our work is we did want to look at the compact impact on the governments, which is obviously already captured for the Pacific areas. We also wanted to talk about the impact on the economy, which we really characterize as the workforce, and then talk about some social effects. And so, we met with government officials in all the areas that we visited, and they really talked about the way that they as government engage with compact migrants. This is really in the areas of education and in healthcare. I'm going to turn this over to Caitlin now to talk about some of the more specific findings from the interviews and the field work.
So the most describing, we worked with a lot of different federal agencies as part of this review to determine compact migrant eligibility for the select federal programs you see here. You can find a complete version of this analysis on page 12 of our report. It includes detailed notes about eligibility for different programs. Governments in the areas that we visited often raised concerns at the federal level, specifically regarding compact migrants' general lack of access to Medicaid. So although compact migrants are, as noted in the table, eligible to purchase health insurance plans through the Affordable Care Act exchanges or through their employers, some compact migrants noted that these plans were just financially out of reach for them and their families. This, combined with the lack of access to Medicaid, often meant that the population is going uninsured. So on the next slide, it shows an example of a program that a state has created sort of in that space. Three of the states that we visited, Hawaii, Oregon, and Washington, have found a way to cover compact migrants by fully paying their health insurance premiums using federal and state funds. So in these states' programs, compact migrants enroll in an eligible plan through the exchanges. Then the federal government pays for part of the plan through advanced premium tax credits, which go directly to the insurer. And then the state government covers the remaining balance of the premium. So in Hawaii, since 2015, the Healthcare Premium Assistance Program has covered premiums for Hawaii residents who are under the federal poverty level, but for one reason or another do not qualify for Medicaid. The majority of the enrollees in this program are compact migrants, although it is not specific to compact migrants. There were an estimated 3,200 enrolled in the program as of June 2017. Oregon and Washington both have similar programs, though their programs are actually specific to compact migrants. Oregon's COFA Premium Assistance Program was launched in 2017 and leverages $9 of federal funds through advanced premium tax credits for every $1 of Oregon state funds that are contributed. The enrollees in Oregon's program can also apply for reimbursement of out-of-pocket costs after the fact. As of October of last year, there were about 800 compact migrants enrolled. And finally, Washington's COFA Islander Healthcare Program, which you see a promotional flyer for here, just started last year and covers out-of-pocket costs using a preloaded payment card provided to enrollees. The Washington program will also uniquely cover dental insurance starting in 2021. There were about 1,100 compact migrants enrolled last year. We also studied other effects, including the contributions that compact migrants make to the workforces in these areas. We note in our report that compact migrants have long worked in Arkansas poultry processing facilities, as well as their role in tourism and service industries in the Pacific, also as business owners, teachers, government employees, and particularly their work in caregiving industries, including senior care homes. Similarly, we heard from compact migrants about workplace challenges that they encounter, including documentation issues with the Form I-94 and Real ID compliant driver's licenses, in addition to some of the labor abuse and discrimination issues that have been pretty well documented in the press. Finally, we reported on societal effects of compact migration, including some public health issues, including tuberculosis and Hansen's in some areas, public order and law enforcement challenges, and community and volunteer work. For example, in Hawaii, we learned about FAS communities participating in environmental cleanup work or leveraging agricultural expertise to help Hawaii farmers grow a more resilient version of taro. Many FAS community members, we heard, also serve as translators and navigators for their own communities, particularly for newcomers to the area. Finally, as a result of speaking with so many directly involved parties on this work, we compiled a section of our report on stakeholder-identified suggestions to address challenges related to compact migration, either to improve migrants' experiences or address compact impact in receiving areas. So a few examples of that. State government officials and healthcare providers advocated for restoring Medicaid access at the federal level to freely associated state populations. Compact migrants also suggested the extension of SNAP benefits as well. We also heard about a need to simplify Form I-94 access for compact migrants, given that they no longer receive a paper copy of their arrival departure record upon entry to the United States. We also learned that the digital form ages off of the CBP website after just a few years, although compact migrants, of course, may remain in the United States indefinitely. State government officials and nonprofit representatives also suggested pre-departure education or arrival orientation for compact populations relocating to the United States. They also identified a need for more translation and interpretation services in the multiple languages that are spoken by compact migrants. Finally, stakeholders we met with emphasized the importance of community-based approaches to supporting compact migrants, including hiring community health workers from among the FAS population to serve as trusted sources of information. Another suggestion we heard was to address compact migrant housing issues by providing dedicated housing that would align with FAS community traditions and cultural norms, including units that could perhaps accommodate larger families or multiple families in one space. So for more information on challenges and suggestions like that, I would refer you to Appendix 7 of our report.
Okay, and I was going to then just have a few closing comments. And
Okay.
Really, Caitlin just sort of gave a nice summary of one of our appendices, and I just want to point out there's 20 of them. Actually, 19 are substantive, and there's some good information back there. And I want to really highlight a few of them. So one of the things I think interesting about GAO's work and the way we interact with either federal agencies or in this case, the freely associated states, two U.S. territories, four U.S. states, a bunch of federal agencies, is we give them several opportunities to review our facts. And at the end of the project, we send them an agency comment version of the report where they can, again, provide fact checking, but also if they choose to, can write a formal letter that we then incorporate as an appendix in the report. And so I think for this case, those are really important aspects of our document. So we have letters from the 3 freely associated states. These all originated from their embassies. Guam, Mariana Islands, the 2 territories sent, the governor sent letters. And we have letters from the 4 US states where we did field work. And so these are, I think, an important component of the reflection of our work that these stakeholders and participants really, wanted to make comments and provide more feedback and direction really to Congress, who's the recipient of our product. And I just want to point out a few of the things they said. So if looking at the ambassador's 3 letters, several of the important comments I thought would be that, migration rights under the compact are really a fundamental and essential part of this FAS country relationship with the US. They highlighted that restoring Medicaid eligibility for their citizens living in the US and working in the US obviously would benefit the citizens and would reduce the costs that the areas in the US incur. They also thought about sort of our discussion of cost of compact migration and said that it's also important to consider what the benefits are of this migration pattern, both in terms of job creation, taxes paid, community contributions. And we have things in our report which speak to this, but this is something that's not enumerated like the fiscal costs are. The US states and territories also have some key observations. Again, restoring compact migrant eligibility for Medicaid is something that was cited as improving migrant health and reducing local impact. Some of the states that are outside of the Pacific, so that are not classified as affected jurisdictions, just note in their letters that they also are incurring compact costs, but not including compact federal grants under the arrangement. The 2 states in the Pacific Northwest, Oregon and Washington State, both highlighted the legacy of nuclear testing on compact migrants as something that should be highlighted in these discussions. And as David alluded to really in his setup, talking about the American Community Survey, the state of Arkansas, raised the question and concern that the census population estimates are just too low. I would note, I also worked on our 2011 report, and their letter to that report actually had kind of the same. So this is not really a new statement. So anyway, there's a lot of good data, I think, in the appendices, and I think we're very proud of some of the American Community Survey data that we did provide. That's across the 50 states in aggregate on more detailed demographic stuff. I think that's the first time we've been able to provide this information, and I don't think it's been extracted before from the American Community Survey. So I think that's something really interesting to look at. So I'll stop there, and we look forward to comments, questions, and turn it over to you, Sachin.
Well, thank you very much to the 3 of you for that absolutely terrific summary of a very detailed and very attractive report, if I may say, with the tables and the graphics. It's very useful. So one of the things, if I may say, I enjoy about GAO products is that they're very clear and very well structured and very, very useful resources for thinking about policy and larger questions. As we wait for questions to begin to flow through the chat function and Q&A, and I would also mention that some will be coming through the live YouTube. So I will, unfortunately, bear with me, I will have to read them so that everyone knows what we're talking about and what you're responding to. But in the meantime, let me raise a couple of issues that struck me. Some a little bit more technical. In the process of doing the Asia Matters for America effort to really get down to some data that we could do at the congressional district level, state level on a variety of issues. So I have a methodological question. You keep citing ACS, and which is of course a survey, as you say, Ms. Mitchell. I'm wondering, has that been correlated or worked with other data sets like the I-94 immigration forms or entry-exit records or other record keeping? Because this technical, I don't mean to, technical sounds like it's not important, very important issue of the numbers, which then affects a whole bunch of other things, seems to be at the core of the discussion and the letters that you mentioned, Emil. So is there some solution set to getting at a better number and closing the gap between the numbers? So that's one question. I have two broader questions. We're going into renegotiation of compacts, or they're upcoming in that process. Do you anticipate any major changes in the migration rights and elements of the previous compacts, given how important the letters you cited are? Would you anticipate any changes? And another question that comes up occasionally, not relating to the compacts per se, is general immigration reform. As you well know, our country has had major immigration reforms at different junctures. 1965, I believe, was the last major immigration overall. Are compacts separate from any immigration reform that might be done by the Congress? In other words, are they kind of walled off because they are intrinsic to a set of agreements as part of the freely associated states relationship, and therefore would not come under a general immigration reform? It's something I've been wondering. So I just thought I'd pose those questions as we wait for other questions to arrive, and I now see that one has. But maybe Mr. Gutnick or Emil or Ms. Mitchell could take up my initial comments.
So Caitlin, I wondered if you might want to address a little bit of the ACS, sort of start with a little bit of the ACS discussion.
Sure. So, so from the perspective of what other data is available and what could be crosswalked, one thing to note just about the limitations of the ACS data is that the Census Bureau does suppress or keep from disclosing data in areas where the numbers are so small that they actually have privacy concerns about individuals potentially being able to be identified. Sure. So that's one limitation of being able to crosswalk with other data, is sometimes you can't find out, how many Palauans live in Minnesota. Mm-hmm. So that's one challenge. We did also in our report, in Appendix 3, look at some Department of Homeland Security data using entry and exit data. That's a little bit of a way to track some more net migration over time, because the number of departures would get subtracted from the number of arrivals per year, and that could be a positive or a negative. We looked at that figure for 3 years, 2017 through 2019, mm-hmm. And the numbers that we reported there were net arrivals of about 3,000 a year from the FSM and about 1,500 from RMI. We actually were showing potentially net departures for Palau. But just in terms of a very, very back of the envelope type of calculation, that does seem to track with sort of the increase that we saw over a longer period of time. That it makes sense. So looking at it from that perspective, the data checks out a little bit. I'm not aware of any other federal sources of data that would crosswalk neatly with the ACS.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I was wondering. Emil, did you have comments on the other questions?
Well, I was going to see if David wanted to talk a little bit about sort of what he saw looking ahead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thanks for that, Emil. Well, I mean, just to address a couple things that you raised, Satu. The first one is, to what extent is the migration rights under the compact subject to any of the terms, conditions, restrictions, applications that the federal government may place, or legislative acts with respect to migration, the larger question of migration. And I don't think any of us would want to say never or categorically say, unequivocally. Mm-hmm. None of the three of us are attorneys, but I will say that in all the times we've looked at this, there has not been a suggestion that this provision, as long as it's in play, would be affected by other migration actions of the U.S. government. Now, I suppose one could get creative and think about emergency declarations and other sorts of ways in which, if somebody really wanted to keep people from emigrating or visiting or migrating to this country, one could seek to establish. But I think the rule of law is such that this provision doesn't really touch.
I see.
First thing.
May
Second
I
thing is
follow up on one point there, because you use that phrase exceptions, and I just wondered if are those listed in the compacts themselves? What exceptions would apply for these rights of migration?
And I'm going to take a quick stab at that, and then Aim will give you the correct answer. But so the I don't believe that they're spelled out, but the things that come to my mind are, there is the question of public charge. Migrants could be subject to deportation due to public charge. And I think the current administration in the U.S. has tried to take a very forward-leaning stance on a number of different aspects of that. And while I'm no expert, just understanding the press, there certainly has been some suggestion that people will not be getting visas and other permissions to enter if there's any question that they would be accepting public benefits. Now that's considered very, very restrictive way of applying, but we are in times when such things can be mentioned or have been mentioned. I don't know, Amo, anything else that, I think criminal record is in the free associated states. So if you have been, to the best of my knowledge, if you've been convicted of a crime in the Marshall Islands, for example, you're going to not be able to enter. Is that correct, Amo?
Yeah, I was going to say that the general grounds for inadmissibility still apply to the FAS. Their opportunity is they can enter without requiring visas. There's not a time restriction on entry, and they have permission to live and work in the U.S. And so they have a fundamentally different right of access to come into the U.S. than other people in the world. As David mentioned, the public charge is a federal policy which has certainly was in the news during the period that we were conducting field work. And I know as we had meetings with community members across all of these jurisdictions, we had evening meetings with the people from the Micronesia, from the Marshall Islands, from Palau. In a few locations, everyone was combined as FAS citizens overall. But people were really quite concerned about how implementation of public charge would potentially affect them, and whether they or their children participating in federal benefit programs would allow them to be labeled that way. So that was, that's a live concern in the community, and certainly understandable. I did want to say that, you had the question about whether the negotiations are going to, address migration. And unlike our work that we did in 2001, we really didn't hear much discussion about migration provisions that people wanted to change among the governments. In 2001, there were several things on the agenda which were addressed in the 2003 amended compacts. Those covered adoption. There was a bunch of instances of labor recruiting, which had been considered problematic in the U.S. And sort of trafficking almost. And there was also a desire by the U.S. government to have machine-readable passports as a requirement. And so several things were addressed in the negotiations in 2003. And so, whether the U.S. government and the freely associated states want to jointly address things, they do have an opportunity during any kind of extension of new provisions. So I would note that. I saw in one of our, this might be me jumping to a question and answer, but I saw that there was a question about sort of what the jurisdictions can do to improve compact impact reporting.
That's right. That's a question from Richard Volstek, our president out in Honolulu. And so he did ask the question, what are your expectations for increased funds to assist states in this regard?
Okay, so I'm going to take two different questions, and one sort of forward-looking, to which I don't think we really have the answer. That's a congressional prerogative. But one thing which GAO has reported about quite extensively, particularly in our 2011 report, is we really dug into the methodology and the data behind the compact impact reporting of Guam, CNMI, and Hawaii. Mm-hmm. And we found, while we don't doubt the numbers of compact impact are reasonably large, we did find issues with respect to the accuracy of the data, the consistency, both across time in the reporting, even between departments within the same government. So we made a recommendation to the Office of Insular Affairs at the Department of the Interior that they issue some guidelines to assist the affected jurisdictions to improve the quality and reliability of compact reporting. Draft guidelines were prepared, but they were never issued. And so we did not sort of reassess it in this report, but we did find that the areas were continuing to use some of the same methods they previously used, which were without the benefit of any additional guidelines. And so I would point back to our middle report on this series,
right?
Some further information on that.
Right. Ms. Mitchell or Dr. Goodnick, any comments on this? Otherwise, I'll move to the couple other questions we have there, because we did read Mr. Volstek's question. Let me, the other question we have is now, an anonymous attendee asks, how do we ensure, bear with me, this is for the live on YouTube folks who may not know what question has been submitted. How do we ensure that jurisdictions are held to a uniform methodology of calculating costs as well as contributions? You spoke to contributions, Emil. How do we allow for more specific and meaningful collaborations between US and freely associated state countries on these reports so that there are agreements on methodology and the most accurate way to delineate who is an FAS citizen, or how do we compare contributions versus costs? So this again gets to the issue of the cost benefit, but also kind of a uniform way of assessing that across the states and jurisdictions.
Okay, that's a good question, and I think that probably comes back to me from my colleagues. So I would say a couple of comments. One is if the when Congress developed the ability of the affected jurisdictions to provide reporting to Congress and to the administration, it actually only asked for cost. So the concept of sort of a net effect was not really included in the way the question was asked in the legislation, either in 1986 or in 2003. And so the reporting is really has focused on cost. I do think as you talk to the state and territorial officials in these jurisdictions, people recognize there's benefits as well, and people pay taxes, for example, and that's often not tracked that way. On the cost side, one of the questions in this is sort of the identification of FAS citizens. And when we did our assessment in 2011, we did find that was a real challenge for the sort of the tracking of, I'll call it administrative data, either by the school system, by health clinics, by the police department, whatever agency you were talking to. There's not necessarily a way to identify FAS citizens based on what their year of entry was, and particularly whether people were maybe the U.S. citizen children of FAS. They would not necessarily be captured in a lot of these databases, and so it is very hard to kind of think through the method of identifying the right population of people to count. One thing that has happened in the last year, which we discussed somewhat in our report, is that the Department of the Interior did provide a technical assistance grant that was that's being implemented by the University of Guam, which was to sort of do some research and some preliminary assessments of how to better structure this sort of impact cost computation and consideration. One thing that has happened, as we understand it, is this reporting process, or this research process, has been delayed due to COVID.
Mm-hmm.
So some of the collaborative things that were planned in this process have been delayed. So I don't know when that technical assistance project is going to be completed, but I know that when we were meeting with officials in Guam, they really pointed to this as one way forward, I think, to address several of the things in this question.
Well, that's very good. Can I follow up one thing that's always puzzled me, and this is maybe a little bit little into wonky and geekiness on numbers, which I enjoy quite a lot. But I've often wondered, when you do these studies, and not only in GAO, but this particular study, Emil, at GAO, but others, we adjust for dollars over time, and inflation adjusted dollars and what have you. But even in jurisdictions in the US, a dollar in X state is not the same dollar in Y state in terms of expenditures. Or how do you account for this differential? Because, let's put it this way: a dollar in New York City versus a rural area, it's the same dollar, to be sure, but it's a different dollar of expenditure in real terms. So how do you adjust for that if you're trying to adequately fund states properly and effectively for the actual burden that they are encountering?
So I think that's a good observation, that sort of the cost structure of different states is really quite, can have quite a different spread. And one of the things that we do observe as we look at some of these compact impact costs is that you do have some real differences between the states. Mm-hmm. in sort of the levels that they're reporting. And see if I can pull up a little bit of data, but I think one of the places that's easiest to kind of look at that is per student cost.
I see.
Which varies widely across U.S. states. I think I was looking at some U.S. Census data, so it's like, this is a couple of years old, but it's like $12,000 per student is sort of the average cost in the U.S. And I think it ranges from like a high of $20,000 in some state. But for example, in that data set from Census, like Hawaii per student cost was $14,000 in public schools. But Arkansas, another state that we did work in, was $10,000. And I think Washington and Oregon were more at roughly the U.S. level. So there's a lot of, in some sense, some of these cost differences are actually already built into when the government does a cost of providing services, they're actually already capturing some of that.
I see. That explains. Okay.
Whether that's good or bad, I don't know, but that is sort of the way that the cost, when they work it up from the grassroots level like that, they're actually capturing really different levels of income and teacher pay and employee pay, among other things.
Okay, if anyone else has a comment, otherwise let me turn. We have about 5-6 minutes left to go in our program today. So let me get to the Q&A, and let me just, please forgive my pronunciation of the names, folks. I'm doing my best here. Sam Ilsugam has 2 questions, and I'm going to try to get them both at the same time for our GAO panel. Does the report provide any recommendations on how the affected jurisdictions can improve their compact impact reporting? And also the question, what is the growth rate for each of the FAS communities in the US? I wonder, in your statistical data package there, I haven't gone through each one of those graphs and charts. Can maybe address those 2, and then we'll go to looks like the final question on citizenship, please. Ms. Mitchell or Emil or Mr. Goodnick.
Happy to take the data question, although I'm afraid we don't have a particular finding on the growth rate of each individual FAS community within the United States. Again, it sometimes turns out to be a suppression error of we don't always have the count at a state by state level, so we weren't able to roll it up for each of the 3 FAS then and now. I will point an interested party, though, to Appendix 2 of our report, which does break out FAS populations by state if they are interested, where available.
Great, thank you. Anything else, Samuel, on this?
I was going to say, I see Michael Levin has a question
Yes.
about citizenship, and I'll just do a shout out to him. He had actually prepared, I think, the first 3 U.S. Census estimates that were done for the Interior Department, and so has the background for our group today, all of us, including myself, on this question. The data that has been drawn so far has come from the American Community Survey, which continues to ask some questions about place of birth. So the decennial census, obviously the last decennial census also did not include citizenship. It included the ethnicity question, which we did some analysis of a few years ago, but that's really kind of a different basis of counting people than what the Congress laid out in the 2003 legislation, which would be people that entered under the compact. So they needed to, you kind of need the citizenship tag for that, plus date of entry to do the count the way Congress set it up. So I don't know right now that the exclusion of citizenship from the decennial census has an effect so far. And I know the question earlier was again asking about, Sam had asked about impact reporting and what would improve that. And I would again point back to our 2011 report. We sort of went through the conceptual pieces of the reports which we saw that could be improved. We also referred to a couple of source documents for guidance, one of which is an OMB circular. Another is actually a GAO product, which is about cost reporting that we have tried to push throughout the federal government as a best practice. And so we have been hopeful that some of these concepts will be incorporated in what comes out of the University of Guam research, and if the Department of Interior should ever issue guidance in the future.
Okay, great. I've got a couple more questions, so thank you for answering Mr. Levin's question, and we can turn to 2 others that I know we're right at 6 o'clock, but if you don't mind, these are very interesting questions and I'd like to accommodate them. An anonymous attendee asks if states are looking for impact funds tied to FAS migrant numbers, how do you account for the fact that they are also counted in the general census numbers, which is tied to federal funding as well? So that's one question. And Windsor Taro asks, could this data help, the data that you've accumulated, help state and federal governments prepare models for increases in migration due to climate change linked displacements?
Both of those are really good questions. And in looking maybe first at just sort of the technical issue about FAS migrants being sort of double counted, if you will. One of our criticisms in 2011 of some of the cost estimates is that they did not net out federal funds. And so we really looked at the compact costs that were being reported and asked the question, is it just state or territorial funds that are being considered, or is it also already counting federal dollars basically that have been transferred? And so that was precisely one of the points that we wanted to raise with the jurisdictions is you should net out federal funds that went both to accommodate FAS numbers as well as U.S. citizen numbers, and then talk about the relative impact on state funding. I think with respect to climate change, I think that's a really important question as to what are going to be the impacts of the changes in climate and the ability of people to live in some of these FAS areas, particularly the low-lying atolls, and what might other jurisdictions see. I think we do have a little bit of information, as Caitlin pointed out, on source of FAS migrants by state. It's not available everywhere, but for example, it is in some of the states with larger populations. And so it's easy, I think, to link climate change, particularly to the Marshall Islands, where virtually every place that people live is affected as a low-lying atoll. And so maybe there are ways that somebody can project, you know, sort of a source of migration looking ahead.
Ms. Mitchell, did you have anything to add or at this point?
No, just to say although it wasn't the primary reason we heard, we did hear people describe issues associated with climate change, such as depleted fishing stocks or flooding as causes for migration.
Right. Well, we're now 3 minutes over, and I'm very conscious that it is midday out on the West Coast, where many people will be particularly interested in this topic, but also, of course, in our East-West Center in Honolulu and surroundings. So I do want to be mindful of time and respectful of people's time. But let me just highlight a couple of things before I formally thank you. One is that we just got a message from the Office of the President of the FSM that they have been watching the live YouTube stream and very much appreciates the East-West Center and the GAO collaborating on this program. So I think they welcome the opportunity to have your report discussed and heard. Let me also take this opportunity to say that we have a number of upcoming webinar-based programs. They range from an upcoming program on the South China Sea dispute from the executive director of the Institute of Maritime Affairs and Law at the University of the Philippines on July 10th, to Cambodia-US relations on the 16th, et cetera. So I'm not going to go through the full advertisement, but Sarah Wong will put a list and a link to RSVPs on the chats section. And please do check out all of our East-West Center programs, both run out of Honolulu and in Washington. Just be mindful of the time where the program is being held, because sometimes you can think it's being done in Washington or in Honolulu. So it's useful to check where the program is originating to get the right time on your schedule. With that, let me just say once again, thank you to our GAO colleagues, Dr. Gutnick, Mr. Freiberg and Dr. Freiberg and Dr. Mitchell. Thank you so much for taking the time late in the day to discuss this fascinating report. I know you've done it before, but I just find this endlessly fascinating, the nexus between our relationships with the FAS countries and the domestic impacts and how they shape the interrelationship. And I think we'll have occasion to discuss this more as we go forward with the renegotiations coming up and with a whole host of issues related. We didn't get to remittances and a whole bunch of other things that were on my mind, but perhaps on your next occasion. Let me also just extend a warm welcome to our GAO colleagues, that if there are other reports that we can usefully discuss in the US-Asia relations space, we would welcome the opportunity to do so. I know you have a fine crew there at GAO working on a range of issues, and we'd be delighted to work with you. So, and thank you again for the participants, 75 plus, I think, joining us either on YouTube or on the Zoom. So thank you again, and everyone have a pleasant day, and we look forward to seeing you again. Stay healthy, and thank you from the East-West Center.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.